Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to our first IEEE USA live stream panel discussion, Post-COVID-19 Outlook, Opportunities in the Shift. We have an all-star lineup of panelists from across various industries who will give their perspectives into the great potential that these recent shifts may bring. And now I'll pass it off to IEEE member and our moderator for this webinar, Dr. Terrence Yeo.
Thanks, John. Shift usually occurs over the course of years. Think the PC, the internet, smartphone app ecosystems, social media. They call it disruptive, markets shattering, revolutionary. But looking back, these market shifts are glacial compared to the depth and breadth and speed of COVID-19's effect across all of humanity. This panel comes at a pivotal time in the COVID-19 fight, especially in the United States. We're facing a resurgence of cases after trying to get back to the status quo. We can all see now that this is a fundamental shift in what it means to be human and how to relate to one another. Hi, I'm Terrence Yeo with Raytheon Technologies and a senior member of the IEEE. IEEE is the world's largest technical professional organization dedicated to advancing technology for humanity. IEEE and its members around the world are working to develop new technology that will overcome our current situation. Humanity is always looking for opportunities in the shift to respond to the need. That's our strength and why we will emerge from this global crisis stronger and more resilient. Today, we've assembled a star panel of thought leaders to give you their insights into the opportunities in the post-COVID-19 world. Carol Hunsman, lead futurist at the Aerospace Corporation's Center for Space Policy and Strategy. Daniel Marujo, former Chief Strategy Officer for the DMEA, Defense Microelectronics Activity Directorate, now Managing Director of Trusted Strategic Solutions. And Nagesh Rao, formerly the Director of Business Technology Solutions at the U.S. Small Business Administration, OCIO, now acting CIO with the Department of Commerce, Bureau of Industry and Security. So without further ado, let's hear from each of the panelists on what opportunities they see in this time of shift. Daniel, you have the floor.
Excellent. Well, Terrence, thanks a bunch for providing the introduction, and I'm very happy to talk to everyone here virtually, which is now the new norm. Terrence kind of gave us a challenge on describing ourselves and what our backgrounds were as kind of the lead-in for this entire webcast. And a portion of me wanted to go and kind of give just a full detailed resume, but I took a step back and said, what I think we're all looking for here is not necessarily the overall accomplishments, but what's the go forward? How are we impacted on things today? And based on what we are impacted with the COVID-19 pandemic, where does that put us for the future? So as Terrence mentioned, I was the former chief strategist for the Defense Microelectronics Activity with a background in material science and a double E for my bachelor's at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in electrical engineering. I did a little bit of work over at Raytheon Missile Systems, which really set me up for a 10-year stint over at DMEA. Now, I started out as a technologist, and being a technologist, it got me involved in a number of really neat things, everything from the Trusted Supplier Program that DMEA stood up to the National High Reliability Electronics Virtual Center, also known as HiRev, which is where I actually met Terrence and had the opportunity to work with him on a number of things. From there, it allowed me to become more or less a social butterfly, and I was able to go and kind of integrate into a number of DARPA programs, some of them that you guys may be familiar with, things like CRAFT, OMG, IRIS, to IARPA programs, things like Micron's, Raven, TIC. And those programs really expanded my network into a number of different areas, working with the different services, Army, Navy, Air Force leadership, to national security space leadership. As that momentum continued to go, it allowed me to take on some more challenging roles. I became the director of office research for technology applications at DMEA, and then finally the chief strategist. In doing that, it allowed me to do a number of neat things, such as interfacing with people over in Congress, where I helped to contribute to a number of different congressional bills, to directly interfacing with people in the executive office of the president and the White House. So you can imagine with all of these different momentum steps, I've had the ability to meet a lot of different people. The unfortunate thing with that is, you're also impacted directly by the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to give two specific areas that I was impacted. One is a little bit not as exciting as the other one, but they both hold a very important role in where we're at today. So as I was doing my role as the chief strategist, I had the pleasure of going to a restaurant in Manhattan called the Bombay Bread Bar. And there was a chef that was there that is probably the best, most talented chef I've ever met in my life. I just recently found out that he was infected by COVID and actually passed away. So the unfortunate thing is that people will no longer be able to taste what he was able to create. And this is now a impact that is going to happen around the world and is continuing to happen, where we're losing people that have such special talents that are not able to provide these talents for the future. The second example that I want to give is a person that I just recently started a business with who also got COVID. And he was able to become a survivor and has been talking on a number of these different areas. The one that he's talked to quite a bit is how we are able to use the new norm and excel within the new norm. And being able to have that as a platform for people that are able to adapt, to be able to have impacts around the world. So COVID-19 is going to be something that is going to change everyone's life. Everything from the not so exciting things like, people passing away is what I just described, to people persevering and finding ways to go ahead and take this as an opportunity to move forward. So I'm very pleased to be a part of the panel today. Terrence, thank you very much. And I would like to hand it over to the other panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves.
Thanks, Daniel. We're really looking forward to the insights you'll have during the panel discussion. And it's great to see that deep background that you have, both in industry as well as in government. Kara, you're up.
Hey, everyone. I'm Kara Hunsman, lead futurist at the Center for Space Policy and Strategy at the Aerospace Corporation. So I am really in charge and leading our strategic foresight initiative within the company. And what that really means is looking at how to help the space enterprise be future ready and pushing ourselves towards our preferred futures. So a lot of my background, a lot of the methodology I use is absolutely relevant, I think, to the conversation that we're going to have today. Like my colleague Dan, I kind of started off too as a technologist. I have a undergraduate and master's degree in air and astro engineering from Purdue University. And I kind of fell into this practice of strategic foresighting several years ago when I was working on strategic support on a couple of programs. And I really was trying to figure out how to get away from the quicksand of the reactionary tendencies of what we're seeing in terms of fielding capability, in terms of having more myopic perspectives on how that capability will operate in a very fast-moving world. And I think there are real hardships with trying to break old habits of sinking in and defending the status quo. And so I was looking for ways that could help maybe with disrupting the tyranny of the present. And it turns out that there actually are tools to help us do this. And they're not necessarily new, although the practice has been evolving very rapidly. And I'm working on a very exciting field of trying to bridge the technical solutions and approaches with the more socio and foresighting practices. So I think there's some really exciting fusion of those capabilities and competencies moving forward, especially as we're looking at our exciting future ahead. So obviously, I spend a lot of time thinking about space, but it's usually in the context of a changing global environment. In terms of, bringing it back to what's going on in space right now, we have a lot of activity in the commercial sector, really vibrant, promising of sustainability in the commercial sector. We have things, a lot of satellites going up in LEO. We have plans to go to cislunar, the moon, beyond. We just stood up the Space Force. We have our eye on Mars. There's a lot of exciting activity going on, but we have systemic short-sightedness that I think is holding us back. And in order for us to kind of overcome those problems, we really need to harness that collective of the space enterprise and think more holistically if we're going to make any sort of transformational strides. And I think, interestingly enough, there's a lot of parallels in what I'm seeing with how the world is facing COVID today. I think we all have to think more holistically. Reflecting on what are the real deep drivers for why we're here today. There's an increasing number of people on the planet. There's limited resources, and there's resulting impacted ecosystems. These pandemics, while some may call them black swans, are absolutely not black swans. We have to humble ourselves, I think, and take the opportunity to make this a learning moment, a transformational learning moment. And if we don't, I think that's where we fail. Leveraging some of the imagery, I'm sure many of you have seen it, watching how there's just this massive shift in, our ecosystems and pollution just because humans are not traveling as much, right? We've seen the immediate results of that in certain geolocations just based on how the pandemic has spread. And it's been extraordinarily eye-opening. What an interesting and an incredible observation experience for us. So that had me, I was looking at some of that imagery and I was going, there's got to be ways to create a more abundant world, to uplift the world through capabilities and technologies. And maybe this is our chance to challenge our assumptions a bit differently. And I think really addressing the underlying causes is going to be the key to creating transformational capability. So for all of you out there that are inventors, that are innovators, I think there's huge potential in biotechnology and healthcare, education, logistics, communications, workplace efficiencies, manufacturing, security. Like there's all these places that are just so ripe, especially now, for us to reinvent how we do things. And so I think it's a really exciting time. And I guess I would just say, to summarize how we should be moving forward, it's an opportunity, right? Today's discussion is all about opportunities. I think it's our opportunity to listen. I think to do some soul searching, both professionally as global citizens, personally with your families, to reflect, to focus on the core of what matters most. And most importantly, what do we want to build to? Because it's an opportunity to do that. So I'm really looking forward to having the conversation with my fellow panelists. And thank you for being here today as well.
Thanks, Kara. I think all of us are anxious to get back to the status quo, but then we've never really asked that question. Do we really want to go back to the way things were? And I think that's something we need to think long and hard during this discussion. So Nagesh, on to you.
Thank you, Dr. Yo, and it's an honor to be part of this webinar with Daniel and Kara, and both have provided some illustrious remarks that I think will provide well for food for thought as we undergo this next hour for this conversation and dialogue around change. And as fellow engineers, physicists, scientists who've pivoted in our career, I'm going to start off with the equation that I think all of you will appreciate, and that is delta S is greater than 0. Standard law of thermodynamics, right? Entropy is there. That's standard law, delta S, chaos, change. And I think to answer your question very simply put, Terrence, change is the new norm. E-commerce is the new norm. The fact that we're going to have to be engaging with each other in video conferences and making best use of technology to augment our dialogues or business processes and whatnot, that is the new norm, and it's not going to change anytime soon. And as someone who has been evangelizing on this for years, whether it was in the private or currently in the public sector, the key thing that we have to keep in mind as change is coming about constantly, and now it's a constant variable in the equation for how we do things every day, is preparedness. We just have to be prepared for the abnormal. I think if anything, this pandemic has showed us where we are rich and where we are woefully inept. And I think if anything, as like Kara has said, we have to be taking this information and processing through it and adapting to it and learning from it and going forward. So I'll leave it at that so that we can go forward. But I think everyone just needs to remember and realize that change is the new norm.
Thanks, Nagesh. I think change is always one of those things that makes us humans especially adapted to do this. We're talking about this before the webinar started, that as humans, right, we are primed for change. We are able to adapt to that, where things like AI are not able to do that. All the credit card monitoring systems are going haywire. All of these travel optimization algorithms are all going haywire because they're not able to adapt to the change that we are able to do. And I think that's where human intellectual horsepower will be what drives us in that future. So thanks for those great comments, Nagesh. We'll start off with our first question, but this is a free-flowing discussion, so feel free to jump in anytime. And also the audience, as you're watching, feel free to go into YouTube chat or the Facebook chat and ask questions, and we'll pull out a few during that discussion to ask the panelists. So first question is, every shift upsets the established, optimized systems of the economy. In this time of shift, there's been massive reorganization. Example, location is no longer a limiting factor for employment. The desire of coming together into an office is now a thing of the past. What areas do you see in your respective industries that are having these massive shifts, and how are they adapting, and where do you see the future opportunities? And we're really talking about new business. We're talking about new concepts as leaders within the organization. Where can we go to get ahead of that next step of change to thrive?
So, Terrence, it's a great question because we've all been talking about it as we did our intro discussions here. Is that, this change was actually just kind of a nuclear blast to the norm, right? What we were very comfortable in doing is no longer existent. We all, as a community, have to be more like cockroaches and find different ways to survive in these different types of areas. Now, what do I mean by that? A way that I usually connect with people is I go to dinner meetings, social events, and the such, and you get to understand people on a personal level. How do you do that through a video conference? How do you do that through a telephone call when you want to understand what a person is doing, but you also want to be able to create a relationship that is not one that is just fully business oriented? You want to be able to understand, what the other person that you're talking to is about, other ways that you can work together, and all these different types of things. How do you take the current norm and transition it into a platform that allows you to be as successful and be able to grow like you did during the pre-COVID era? I think that that's going to be the biggest challenge. And prior to the webinar, we were talking about multiple different platforms on how people are able to interact with one another that is not the classical way. For example, 10 minutes ago, I didn't know that there was something like a virtual concert. But now people are getting together and virtually hanging out in ways that they might not have done 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So I think that that's one of the big challenges that we have in this massive shift. How do we have a personal and not just a business interaction on a go-forward basis?
Yeah, Dan, I really liked your comment about cockroaches because, Terrence, your assumption that, not all jobs really are geolocation dependent, I think isn't true across the board, right? Especially, again, I'm putting my space hat on, right? If you're in manufacturing or you work classified work, that's the elephant in the room, I think, for our industry right now. And we are exactly being cockroaches. We are trying to make do with what we have. But the writing's on the wall. It's not conducive for the long term if this is indeed, going to be a long-term enduring thing, which I think we need to be prepared for that. So, in terms of manufacturing, I think there's plenty of opportunities to automate, to do, some sort of avatar on set where you can still monitor maybe from a different place, but the manufacturing can continue forward. The classification issue, I think, is so much more difficult. And gosh, we know the government is working on it, but it's something that, definitely needs to be addressed, I think, sooner than later. And my colleague, Dr. Jamie Moran, actually wrote a really interesting op-ed talking about the need for collaboration and how, if you're going to meet, the mission and move forward, at what point, if all your efforts are trying to protect national security, does that get in the way of you actually achieving your mission? And so I think for me, I see that as an absolute must-have solve, and I don't think that's going to happen in the near term, but we can't lose sight of that. So, but I think in terms of collaborative platforms, especially if we're, I'm sure most of our listeners have a technical background. I mean, think about all the collaborative platforms that could provide you with AR, VR, modeling and sim. I mean, I think there's like a whole new brave world out there for really cool collaborative engineering platforms.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And I was just thinking when you're talking about that, model-based systems engineering is primed for that, right?
Yes.
Just like Zoom was primed for this particular, there's these nascent technologies that are kind of viewed as toys. It's like, okay, well, you don't have to telecommute because you could just drive through the highway. Now we said, no, you can't do that. So now you have an information superhighway that's been ready for the last 20 years. Now you get to use that, and we're all fine with that. I think that's what's exciting, right?
Terrence, I'm going to add one other piece to this with what you just described. What it's really doing is it's accelerating a lot of these different technologies. So like you mentioned some of the virtual stuff or the modeling and sim, there was a need for it, but now we're really pushing the envelope to get them to a prime time type of capability. So there is a benefit in some of these things because our backs are against the wall. We know that we have to get stuff done. So these virtual ways of doing things, digital ways of doing things, you've seen an acceleration like no other. And without the pandemic, it would not have happened.
Mm-hmm.
I think to add on, what's going to be interesting is watching how the delineation will happen between blue collar and white collar work, right? So the service industry is taking a beating right now as it relates to just this. If you looked at restaurants and fast food and whatnot, the ones who were prepared and who were not prepared to take advantage of Postmates, Uber Eats, and whatnot, that gig economy kind of model, the ones who during the pandemic were able to switch very quickly and be able to do on-demand food delivery service, and the ones who did not, if the economic studies are already showing out that, the vast majority of the ones who had already been kind of toying with it have been surviving. The ones who did not, it's been too late. So you're going to see that impact. I think Daniel brought up a really good point about the acceleration of technologies. We've noticed our infrastructure is not sound. Our broadband infrastructure needs a lot of work. Maybe at the city level, it's great, but when you go out into the rural area, it's horrid. And so now we as a country, and I think the world is realizing that we need a more fortified broadband infrastructure if we're going to be engaging more on the digital front of engagement. What Kara said about that right change for robotics and automation with AR, VR, I think what's going to be also interesting is the advancements in robotics itself. If you're thinking about digital avatars is what Kara was saying, I'm also thinking about physical avatars, because now all of a sudden, if you can link up with, say, a series of robots and then direct them to do the work for you in a manufacturing line, that itself might change the game. I think what's also interesting is 9 to 5 is an archaic system. I think because of COVID, we are now realizing that notion of going to work from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. is now super archaic. And I think that's going to open up some new opportunities for engagement, not only is how we see 9 to 5 here in the US, but globally speaking. I think there are going to be people who are taking advantage of the pandemic and going, well, maybe I don't need to work from 9 to 5. Maybe I work from noon to 8 or 9 p.m., engaging on the international front, as I said, again, e-commerce, but really, saying, I'll go to sleep during day and be awake during night and deal with the, on economic trade or engagement of my commerce or business with countries over in Europe and Asia instead. So I think those opportunities are really starting to pop up because it's now become, it's no longer, that little microcosm of folks who are taking advantage of it. I think a lot of people are now realizing and waking up and going, wait, I have alternatives. I should consider these alternatives.
So really the broadening of an international market across the globe is what you're seeing as opportunities as we all kind of decouple from the TikTok cycle of regular pre-COVID life. I really see that. I think one silver lining that Kara was talking about in terms of defense, in terms of classification, I think as we push more into the open area, it gives us two things. One is helps us think clearly about our systems and what truly is that important classified information But what that does is not only work on that, but also expands the space of usable technology that's commercial, be able to put into the commercial sector. I think those are the huge things that are important. One example that I just learned about and just being part of a new Raytheon Technologies employee is that the microwave came from a radar system that Raytheon was designing way back when. Those sort of innovations and technology game changers can be more accessible now because they're not going to be locked down in these smaller compartments. And if we add that to a more global viewpoint in terms of time, I think we have something really, really exciting, not just for the local economy, but for the global economy. So that's really, really exciting. I want to go a little personal here, and I know we've all experienced something together. We've really had a global lockdown. We were joking somewhat earlier that our children, who are very young, are going to be called Generation C, Generation COVID, because they'll never know a world where their parents weren't in the home working, where they never knew parents where their parents were out delivering packages so that everybody else could stay home or move around, right? There's a lot of different dislocations and different experiences we're all experiencing. In times of plenty, we behave like the people we want to be. But in times of shift, we have to choose the higher way. So what areas have been a challenge for you personally during this time of shift, and how have you overcome it and focused on the goals and the higher goals of the future?
I was in the midst of this whole crisis from an economic recovery perspective. I was leading the technology efforts for SBA with respect to PPP and EIDL. So anyone who is familiar with the $2 trillion Stimulus CARES Act, the Paycheck Protection Program, and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan programs that were administered by SBA, U.S. Small Business Administration, the technology solutions that made those two programs happen were because of my team. So I was the one who led the teams and built out the solutions very quickly.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Basically, we operated 24/7 for a couple of weeks, and we were told failure was not an option. And that's what it was. Like we were building solutions on the spot very quickly with very little policy guidance, because I think something folks don't realize is that when government executes on a problem in operationalizing that solution, it's done based on whatever guidelines Congress will give us. And so when Congress is trying to craft legislation or law, asking for the executive branch and the agencies that fall under the executive branch, our agencies fall under the White House, to execute on said law, we don't know what's finally set in stone until they actually pass the law and the president signs it. When the president signs it, then it becomes law. And so it gets pretty tough for us to be able to actually execute and pre-bake and prepare, our solutions, especially when it's a technology solution to help administer a policy requirement, when you don't even know what it will finally be in law. And then when it became law, you're given basically, within a week it needs to happen because that's what the law said. It said must be executed within, I think it was like 7 or 10 days. And so it's like, okay, so, we're prepping and planning and trying to create variables ahead of time, not knowing what the final result's going to be that is required of us to develop. And that gets very complicated. And it's why I think if there's any recommendation I can give to the audience, at some point or another, do a stint in DC and understand how public policy is done. Because when you understand how sausage making is made from a political bureaucracy perspective, I think folks really get a true better understanding of why the gears turn the way they do.
So Nagesh, I'm going to follow up with that, because first I want to say thank you for all that hard work. It did two things. It helped to really provide the support that the economy needed. But it did another thing that was very interesting. It really showed a lot of the impacts that we have on a supply chain. We were seeing where there was a lot of gaps, where there was a lot of impacts to areas that we didn't think that we could be impacted. I mean, everything from toilet paper to electronics, everything was impacted. And we noticed that our dependency on many things is not just a U.S. problem, it's a worldwide problem. So as we were helping to keep a lot of businesses, above water, other businesses didn't have many choices. So they either had to continue making the product and fill their inventory or pay their people. So we were seeing a lot of these different types of things going on. So I think that one of the big impacts that I've seen in this time of shift is that we've really found as a world where our strengths are and where our weaknesses are. And those weaknesses are something that we need to overcome. And without being able to overcome those, it's going to put us in a very vulnerable position on the next pandemic, the next time something happens. And this is not the first time. History has shown that when people are put against the wall, great things can happen. A lot of innovation can happen. And it is where, going back to the earlier comment, we really need to be cockroaches. We need to find a way to exist when there is a nuclear blast or a pandemic. And your amazing work in helping different businesses out with the CARES Act and the PPP stuff and all of those different types of things needs to be replicated across multiple different factors. People shouldn't be sleeping. They should be taking it serious and doing these different types of things. So from the challenge that I've seen on the shift, it has to be the supply chains, the vulnerabilities associated with those, and where we find areas of opportunity to go ahead and address them.
Yeah, and I guess I would just like to echo, thank you, Nagesh, for all your hard work. I can only imagine. As the go-to strategic foresight practitioner in my community of circles, it has been also very eye-opening that in amidst of a pandemic, we are actually a little bipolar. Some of us are wanting more and more analytical data to back up our predictions about what's going to happen next. And others are really taking the opportunity to step back and go, this particular instance is highly disruptive and we have to have a near-term tactical plan. But then what, right? I think, can we at least acknowledge that our reactive tendencies are not serving us any longer? We live in a different world and there are better ways. And if you put the hard work in and the time in and you commit to a long view, we can get ourselves out of this mess. And that can be all the way from the tactical work that Nagesh is doing all the way to the long-term strategic and technology planning and, infrastructure building that we're doing. And so, I find it like, this is an opportune moment for people who practice strategic foresighting like myself. But it's also extraordinarily frustrating because you would think that no other time in our lifetimes would this be so pivotal. But, we've seen it before. We've had 9/11, right? We've had a whole bunch of other. We've had the 2008 financial downturn. We're not learning. And I really hope that we can take this time to learn and move forward the right way.
So let me add something to that, Kara, because I think that's interesting. I believe that some foresight with a strategic plan that has, maybe 20 years, 50 years, even 100 years is critical to supporting the longevity. But I would also make a comment that I think that not only milestones are critical, but we need to have something that I call Inchstones, where we have small successes that help to build up to better milestones. And each of those different types of perspectives allows us to pivot at a critical milestone if it is the wrong direction because of each of these different stones. So I think that you're right. We are very reactive as a people. And in doing so, it puts us in positions where we're always trying to keep our heads above water. But having a strategic plan that we can adjust as we see small wins going forward is a not only safe approach, it's a sound approach, and it's something that needs to be impacted and implemented today.
Yeah, Dan, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we like to say, exponential vision, incremental change, right? You have to have the agility and you have to have the long view and you have to hold those simultaneously. Absolutely.
I think that's also the difference, really great discussion, the difference between managing and leading, right? Managing is when you have all the information at hand and you choose the right direction and then you proceed in a linear fashion. Leadership is when you don't have that information at hand, much like I'm thinking Nagesh, and being able to set up a site that's usable by millions and millions of businesses across the country within a short period of time, right? Those are the sort of things that I think we need more of. We need more of the leadership mindset to be able to forge ahead and be wrong, to fail in ways that will have a positive outcome in the end. I think one thing that I was thinking about staying up late at night trying to figure this out. I think there are a lot of teachers in the country, in the world, who are trying to figure this out. There's actually a question from a Professor Gupta, and this is what I want to lead into. What are the big challenges for the education system due to COVID-19? We've just had recent reports in California that, especially in Southern California, that it will be an all online system from now on until maybe February, but we never know. That's probably from now on. There's questions about how can I take my child to, or my college student to Harvard when all it is going to a different web page, where that web page streaming cost is $44,000 a year versus a couple thousand, and then you're looking at YouTube Red accounts only $120, $125, and I get to learn as much as the best of the best. So I want to get your take in that, in Professor Gupta's questions. What are those big challenges for the education system due to COVID-19?
Well, I think one thing that's definitely coming up more and more, and it dovetails into education, but it also comes into hiring, because we're starting to see that with the federal government with the hiring practices. Is it education degree requirement, or is it competency requirement that needs to be fulfilled by that resume? And I think what's going to be interesting with the education system itself, whether public or private, K through 12 or even college, is what does that real estate have to look like to educate someone? If someone can get a comparable education and do so virtually rather than having to physically be on site and on premise, does that now enable more democratization of information so that you have now a little bit more of a leveling of the playing field for those who might not have been able to afford or go to college per se, but can do so by doing an online version rather than a physical based version? Because if you think of that cost differential between getting trained and educated at a premier academic institution physically versus online, that overhead cost is significantly different. And I think it's going to require us, but also it's going to give a hard look at the education system and say, why are those costs the way they are? And should they still be those costs? Should a professor, like I've seen this, where business school professors can command a $400,000 a year salary. Is that really justifiable these days? I don't know.
So,
yeah. Go ahead. No, I was just going to add on that I think, another interesting question is like the core competencies that we are actually teaching through our education systems now, are those really the skill sets and the attributes to build the next generation of problem solvers?
Yeah.
I think we need to rethink how we're training our young generations, because as we've seen just in this short period, the folks who are creative, the folks who are agile, that are piecing stuff together, they're the ones that are successful. It's not the ones that have the shiny plaque with the executive degree program. And I think we need to teach people how to have more grit, how to have more curiosity, how to be creative, how to be collaborative. And honestly, many of our programs don't incentivize that. So I think there's a huge opportunity for education systems to start thinking about what is the next generation of problem solving going to need.
So I'm going to take a kind of a different approach here. I think we now need to challenge the universities to justify the costs. I mean, it's always been something that, hey, if you're going to go become a doctor, if you're going to go become a lawyer, you're going to become an engineer, all these different things, it's expensive. You're going to have a lot of student debt. So, hey, to get a good job, you're just going to have it. But what are they really providing to us that we can't get online? Outside of some of the labs that a lot of us have had to do, and those will always be critical. But let's take a Cornell University. Let's say you get an MBA there, not to downplay an education from Cornell, but their major selling point is that we've been around for 155 years with our historic, landscape and capability. Come to the university and be part of the experience. Well, that's not going to be the case anymore. The case is now I need to sit at home because I'm worried about catching the next pandemic. So if I'm going to take my virtual course online, what are you giving to me that I can't go get from a junior college or from a state school or something like that? Why is an Ivy League school education so critical now? Because I'm not getting the experience. I'm not sitting in a large lecture hall. So where's the beef? Where are you guys actually providing something? So I think that as a people, we need to challenge the universities to go and justify that 400K professor's salary? What is he doing to better my education? And in doing that, is he able to justify me going to him versus, going somewhere else? So I think that it's time to, relook at the landscape of what the universities are really doing for us, other than just charging us a ton of money so they can build a new this, that, and the other on their campus.
Yeah.
I'm going to kind of push back a little bit about that. I think the Ivy League system, or the elite system, right, charges that premium, not because of the quality of the education, but it's really the quality of the students that they bring in, as well as the future opportunities, right? I see that Delta is really more of a networking opportunity, right? An alumni of sorts. And I think there is that Delta. There is a premium that's valued in that site. Is the question moving forward, where does that value move ahead? So I would argue that there might be a possibility where there is a democratization, so to speak, of all of the technical capabilities. But you might actually see a difference now in the premium, where those premium luxury brands, so to speak, of education become even more coveted, because those networking capabilities, like we were saying, how do you network with somebody if you can't live face to face with them? How can you not live in the same dorm with them where they're working together and suddenly one of them founds a company called Google, right? And you're not associated with them because all you did was talk to them on Slack. I think those sort of connections may actually prove to be more valuable in the future. I'm not saying that the actual education is better or what have you, but there may be a value in that. So I would say there's a silver lining on top of the silver lining in that case.
So I understand,
parents, because the connectivity that you get at a university, you're right. I just picked Cornell because it was the first university that popped in my head. Let's say there you have the ability to, in previous years, say that I'm networking with former alumni that will get me in the door and the such. So the challenge, and this goes back to the university, how do they sell that same set of opportunities through the networks? Because we're doing virtual meetings now, we're doing virtual happy hours, we're doing everything, from our offices. So I think it almost, with that silver lining, goes back to the universities and says, what are you really still providing me that is a huge value add? Because unless they can justify that through some other kind of platform than they're offering, it's going to be tough.
Well, and to build off what Daniel was saying too, I think this is what's so important and fascinating about the internet and the platforms that are arising because of the internet. Prior to the digital revolution, to engage with exclusive people, you had to go find those network hives to do so. And now with the internet and stuff like that, you no longer have to go to an event at Cornell per se to go and try to meet Carl Sagan, back in time when Carl was alive. Instead, now you can message someone via Twitter or Facebook or whatnot and pose a question. Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, or Lori Garver, the former deputy administrator of NASA, they are now reachable on social media. And now you can go and reach out to them and say, hey, I've got a question. Or, they put some posting out and you say, well, I'm going to challenge your thinking there for a second. That exclusivity is eroding very quickly because of the fact that it's harder to hide away and be in your little bubble.
I also think we should challenge the assumption that, the pandemic isn't going to happen forever, right? I mean, yeah. I think we're going to get back to some sort of physical education institution, physical presence in the workplace, what that looks like. And of course, there's some companies, right, that have just outright said, you know what, we're going to go 100% telework. It's working for us. But some places it makes sense. And so I could certainly see there being some interesting dynamics, knowing that there's a whole bunch of these, open platforms for people to get part of their education experience. And so, the in-person experience is going to have to reinvent themselves. And we're seeing this in retail, right? So the COVID essentially is accelerating what was already in the works.
Fair. Yep.
All really good points. It's really, really interesting. Let's shift over to a different question. This one's from Andrew Kagan. Andrew Kagan asks, over the long arc of history, humans proved to be adaptable to change. but organizations typically change logarithmically while technology often exponentially. How do we solve that for post-COVID?
So, I mean, this is what I do in my everyday job. I mean, this is the challenges, right? The speed at which humans can adapt to change versus the external world, and how do you rectify that? And that goes back to having, I think, a horizon scanning practice where you're able to start being aware of how your global environment is shifting around you and understanding what that means to you, but also how do you take advantage of that? How do you surf disruption? And I think starting to build those competencies within your organizations really is the answer through all of this. And we are living through exponential change like humanity's never seen before, but at the same time, this is probably going to be the slowest it's going to be moving forward. So we better beef up our skill sets in doing that. So I would certainly say, I'm going to get on my, Foresight soapbox. I mean, organizations really need to start doing horizon scanning, understanding what those changes mean, understanding how to take advantage of those changes. And if you don't like the outcomes you're seeing, well, look at actions you can take today to start shifting those things towards a more preferred future.
So the pandemic's giving us something that is a valuable resource that we would not have gotten, is humongous data sets. These data sets of all these different workplace issues, things that are happening within organizations and the such, need to be used as a way to not only create transparency, but also a way to interface with leadership and people that are looking for these different types of, what's next kind of steps. So what I believe that we can do with these data sets is create, the appropriate frameworks. And within each of these different frameworks, we're able to not only integrate the data, but create, I'm going to just use the term dashboards as a way to kind of be transparent from what leadership is actually using to make their decisions. And then from there, as time goes on, kind of going back to the Inchstone stuff, we're able to apply some of these exponentially accelerating technologies like machine learning, for example. And those machine learning algorithms with the big data can help influence leadership to be able to make more sound decisions quicker, transparent for all of the different people in the workforce. So I think that it is actually to our benefit that the technology is accelerating exponentially, because we can tie those different types of exponential solutions into things that really need to accelerate, like decisions that are made from organizational leadership and the such.
I think one thing I've been reading recently is called a book called Startup Way by Eric Ries. It's a book about talking about taking startups, which are human institutions designed to deliver a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty, and apply that inside that of organizations to say, no, we're not going to take the existing logarithmic scale organization for change. We're going to put in seeds of exponential growth, which small startups can do, and do it in a way that doesn't disrupt the entire system, but enables the entire organization to pivot once those ideas pan out. I think those are the sort of organizations that we need to start thinking about to effectively set up startup incubators inside the company. I think a lot of companies are trying that, but we need to continue to look into that, especially in this particular time in which there's so much global change right now. It's an uncertain time. Every business has to think like a startup. So I know each of us have actually had career pivots in the last 6 months, either right before or during this shift. That's why during the introduction, I had to say formerly this, formerly that. I want to get your insights in how to give insights into those who are considering a pivot inside this COVID environment, what to look for, and how to be successful in this time of great change.
I've done career pivots my entire life. I get bored very fast. So if I'm not changing my career up every 5 to 7 years, I will go insane. And so what I suggest to anyone who is thinking about career pivoting and whatnot, if you do a career pivot, don't let your old skill sets go stale. Keep those skill sets that you developed in that prior job that you may have been in fresh and learning so that you may pivot and utilize them down the road again. So, I started off as an engineer, then pivoted into tech transfer and patent law, then pivoted into venture capital and startups, and then pivoted into government policy. And there was patent examination at one time, government policy, venture capital, and then policy around that, and then in IT. And every pivot I've done, I have also made sure that, currently I'm in Gov IT now, but I still keep my skill sets fresh for my engineering background, my patent law background, and my, business stuff from other ventures that I do in my personal time and capacity. And so, even though I may have a different 9-to-5 pivot per se of what my current job is, I always encourage folks to keep a side hustle going on, because when you keep doing the side hustle, that helps grow and keep your intellectual stimulation going.
Nagesh, I just want to say I absolutely agree with what you're saying. Is like everything that you did before should really be something that you use as a strength into your next adventure. And I, speaking to IEEE here, I can't say that engineering is probably it's the best foundation you could ask if you're interested in solving real problems. I can't express how satisfied and happy I am that I chose to do that and go through those studies, because it's really served me well doing a wide variety of jobs. For me personally, I've taken on 2 really important roles this year, or I guess in the last year. I've become a mom for the first time. And and that's its own, trust me, you haven't worked until you've been a parent. I certainly appreciate that now. And then I really am one of those edge cases that Terrence was talking about. I'm at the edge of our organization, trying to be leading the way, shining that light on potential opportunities. So I am really in startup mode. So what crazy person decides to be running a startup organization while being a new parent? But I really got to say, I think that plus COVID has really made me double down on why I think this is so important and why I want to dedicate my life towards giving people the long view, because there's no going back. And we have to teach and equip and train our societies to think in an abundant mindset. And it really is hard. But if we put the work in, I mean, we have plenty of case examples that show abundant mindsets get abundant results. And so I've really, I think, been able to really double down on what I think is important. And so this has been a great opportunity, I think, for me, professionally and personally.
So I'll echo what you guys say, and I'll just add one small piece to it. Wherever you kind of excel as it relates to your current position, if you're looking to move out, whatever score you've amassed there, it does not transition over. You have to earn it. So as the guest was saying, stay relevant. You have to understand, do your due diligence, because it will come. If you have the right work ethic and the right skill sets to continue moving forward, it will come. You just cannot expect it. My answer to this, Terrence, is do it. If you've thought about it, go do it. Don't look back and say, I should have. Go do it.
I think one thing that I've thought of in the last couple of weeks is that failure is only opinion. That we are always afraid of failure. We're always afraid of looking like a fool. But really, that's just an opinion. It's really what you said, Daniel. It's going for it and failing, but failing with style, just like falling with style in Toy Story. It's something that allows us to get higher and also to bring other people along for the ride. And I think that's really exciting. We only have a few more minutes. I wanted to kind of touch base across the entire discussion with one last question. And it's about, I know she's talking about deep space network, but it's really about concepts of Starlink, right? So we've talked about the disaggregation of work. We talk about the need for broadband in rural areas. We have a new technology in space that's coming into view, internet for the masses, for the entire world. What are your thoughts of this fusion of technology where there's, I think 500 satellites now that Starlink network and what OneWeb was trying to do up there? What is that going to do inside this COVID environment? And how can people take advantage of that and also leverage that for other things?
Well, since I'm the space geek, I guess I better answer first. Well, I think it can provide immense opportunity. There are many, many underserved places across the world that are hungry to have this ubiquitous access to all the great digital capabilities we've been talking about. And I think if it's successful, it really is just the start. Because we are moving towards a more connected place. I think with the onset of 5G, with space-based satellite internet, that really is just the start of what I think is, we're going to be moving to, network of everything. And what can that bring us? I think there's immense value that can bring us, both in feedback loops as well as learning capabilities. I honestly, it's use your imagination. And there are plenty of places for us to start thinking through, how do you build a strong, robust infrastructure to enable all of those great things that come out of it? So I'm really excited about the future. And I'm also equally excited that space is moving on up and getting back in it, because, for a while, it was all terrestrial. So I think there's just a lot more diversity of options. So yeah, I think it's great. I think there's going to be a lot of exciting things moving forward.
With the great advances that space can provide in a variety of different areas, we have to have a agreed upon rule set that every single nation will adapt with, because it is the Wild West. And since space is an unregulated area, or a lot of the things are unregulated, we as a world need to say what you can and cannot do. Rules of engagement must be established, and other countries need to ensure that if someone acts up, that there are repercussions. I'm not saying that a full war has to break out, but I'm saying that there has to be ways to ensure that we are using the technical capabilities for the good of humanity, for the good of being able to prosper in these different areas. Because without the regulations, then we will be putting ourselves in a position that vulnerabilities from places that should not be looked at as being picked on will end up getting picked on. So I think that that's one of the big areas, but there is a huge upside to leveraging space for a lot of different technical opportunities on a go-forward basis.
Nagesh, any last words?
I think change is the new norm. That's all I can tell you all.
Hear, hear.
Change is the new norm.
Well, thanks so much for coming together, and this has been a really exciting discussion. I've just heard all these great ideas both before and during, and I'm sure afterward. If there are any questions by the audience, please continue to send them in and leave them on Facebook or YouTube. We'll get back to them after this discussion. Team, thanks so much for coming. Let's do it again. I think this is really exciting. I think we've wrapped into all the ideas that really the IEEE is about, right? This idea of community, idea of benefit, advancing technology for humanity, and allowing us to come together in separate spaces across the world. These are all enabled by societies like the IEEE. I know that we're doing a lot with the 5G and now 6G, which is talking about terabit data rates. So holograms, we're ready for that on our phones. So there are many benefits of being an IEEE member, and if you're interested, come sign up and talk to us about what that would look like. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks, Terrence. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.